the best.
This is a beautiful spring morning. Did you know, Pat? Did you know that the Chinese believe that this is the beginning of spring? Irish people, of course, believe it is the beginning of spring, the 1st of February. But I gather the Chinese believe that this is the beginning of spring. Did you know that?
I think I think, but in fact, they probably have got it more spot on, Jude, because it is. There's well, where I am now, the sun's come out, and I noticed just evening I was in Derry, and I didn't get. I was in, and I was coming out. I was quarter past 5, and it was still bright.
Oh
I thought
yeah,
to myself, "Oh God, that's
yeah.
So
I actually looked. I was going in after took my bread off the oven, and
yeah,
I looked out the window at 4 to 6, and the sky was quite bright still. You know,
yeah. Uh,
very reassuring.
I love the stretches in the evenings.
Yeah. Things can only get better, as somebody once said. Well, whatever became of that guy? Where was he from, Derry? Was he? D Ream?
Was it Peter Kuna?
Something like that.
Uh,
Well, wasn't he a Derry
I
man?
can't remember. I can't answer the question, Jude. I would love to.
I think he was a
Off
Derry
the top
man.
of my head, I
I
can't
thought
remember.
that was it was a cracker pop song.
The
And the
Labour
Labour
used it
Party
as their
used it.
slogan.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, it was
Tony
their
Blair.
piece. Okay, we've got a lot of things to deal with, and we'll try to keep the number limited, but we're going to start off with two items, both of which deal with newspapers. One has to deal with Rupert Murdoch and newspapers, and the other has to deal with Tucker Carlson and, I suppose, newspapers or the media generally. The interesting fact about Rupert Murdoch and the newspapers is that it appears that Rishi Sunak has been having meetings with him as if he was courting a comely maiden. I mean, the Guardian reports him as having it over the past year, 5 meetings, including dinners and so on, with Rupert Murdoch. And I think if you take into account all of the Tory party, there's some like 12 meetings over the last year. What do you make of that? Do papers have that kind of clout, Pat?
Murdoch apparently since he stepped down as chairman of News Corp has had 5 meetings with Rishi Sunak.
Yeah.
Apparently 12 meetings with and all with various ministers.
Yeah.
And all I think in 1 year between. I think the Guardian. I think it's hacked off. Hugh Grant's big time. This was remember the Levinson inquiry after the scandal of what the newspapers got away with.
Yeah,
Levinson came up. There was this campaign activist group hacked off. Was set up, and they said there was 500 and I think it's 534. Jude off the top of my head, meetings between Murdoch's people and various people in government. And they said that's an unbelievable or unprecedented level of access. And the hacked office basically saying the whole thing about media needs to be looked at big time. That one man can influence so much PR, that is so much influence with the government, that the government is no longer acting in the interest of the public, but in the interest of sort of a corporate billionaire.
But Pat, are you sure you're not being too harsh? I mean, what we're talking about here is a newspaper or newspapers and politicians. And you yourself have told us quite frequently that when you were the editor of the Derry Journal, there were politicians all the time calling there and pouring into your ear their side of the story. Is that not the way the world works? That newspaper people who own them or run them get.
I would want a select group have undue influence. Like who else? Name me. Like Rupert Murdoch owns the Sun, owns the Times. He and me having private dinners on 5 occasions in 1 year with the Prime Minister, having 12 meetings and all. Jude, Pat McGarry wouldn't have meetings like that. Jude Collins wouldn't have. This is a guy
I certainly wouldn't have had them. I don't know, but Pat, did you never have a dinner with a politician during your time?
Quite a few. But Jude, the big difference is that these guys are not having a wee dinner to discuss a couple of local events. These guys are out there to discuss policy. Like look at Starmer. If you want to sort of, Starmer has said power before protest. He won't even condemn anything that's happening in Gaza. He won't allow his politicians to go on picket lines because he is so scared shitless, and that's the only term I can use, of the right-wing media saying, there goes the loony lefties again, so on. So he is basically rigidly, in fact, I don't think he stands for anything of them, but that's a side issue. The power of the right-wing media. Jude, apparently, Hacked Office said the meetings that the Tory government have had, about 80% of them have been with right-wing media, like the Sun, the Telegraph, etc., the Daily Mail. They've only had 5% meetings with left-wing, and that would be the Guardian and the Mirror. So in other words, it's a totally disproportionate. And Jude, here's another thing, and I've always said it. When Jeremy Corbyn could be smeared as an anti-Semite, the guy who stood up most for the Jewish people for many, many years, who has stood up for the downtrodden and the oppressed, and his record is unsurpassed, and it's there in public. How he could then be portrayed as being anti-Semitic? And Jude, it was a campaign run exclusively by the right-wing media because Corbyn was inimical to their interests, and it's as simple as that. And anybody who wants to have a look at it can work that out.
Well, I'm sure there's truth in that, okay. And certainly Tony Blair, for example, when he looked like he was going to move into power, he was smooching and smooching around Rupert Murdoch like nobody's business. Here's two questions. One, we don't actually know what they said, because there wasn't any minutes of these meetings. So we don't know what was said. But you're concluding from the fact that they even met that presumably it was to soften up Murdoch. But I mean, Murdoch doesn't look like a guy who could be softened up by anybody if he didn't choose to. But the more important question is, do people read newspapers nowadays, and do they have the same clout? Now, far, far fewer people read newspapers. The question is, how can they have the same clout if people aren't reading them? Or do they read them online? We're always being told that, people...
Yeah, exactly. They are opinions.
Let me finish this one.
Go ahead.
They say that people are all rely on social media for their news. I don't know. If I think of my own case, when I get up in the morning and I go online, I read newspapers online. I don't go to Twitter or Facebook or something like this. I go to news sources, which is essentially what we're talking about here. So in short, has Rupert Murdoch got the same kind of clout that he had at the time of Tony Blair, say?
He may have more influence in many, many ways. Right, first instance, you just admitted yourself. When you're sending me topics that we may discuss, most of them are taken from newspapers.
Yeah.
Online newspapers, by the way. Either the Guardian or the Irish Times or something.
Yeah.
Murdoch owns Fox News. He's big friends with Elon Musk, they think, summary, and Twitter and so on. He still owns, if you check out the traffic online for the Times and the Sun on social media, it's huge. The thing about Murdoch is, remember Tony O'Reilly's famous one? Somebody asked him, Lord O'Reilly, which is a good one. Somebody asked him one time, why do you hold on to the Independent? Remember the London Independent? It was losing hand over fist. He says that newspaper gets me indoors and places of power, like into number 10 Downing Street, and he loved that whole thing. Well, Murdoch, the newspapers shape public opinion, whether through printed media these days or online, and that gives him massive power. And somebody asked him years ago why he didn't like the EU, and he says, because these people don't listen to me. No, he had direct influence on politics. And by the way, Jude, that affects things like capital gains, about inheritance tax, about the tax breaks for his newspapers, and about policy and so on. All the things he is. I'd say Murdoch, away for many years, was far more powerful than any prime minister.
Well, in the past he was, certainly, but I'm wondering if that's the case now. It's true, Pat, what you said, that yes, I would look at newspapers online, and you'd be the same way. But maybe it works in a slightly complicated way. I have a feeling that, yes, Murdoch has got enormous influence, or people like him. Newspapers have an influence because they deal with the matter in some degree of depth or coherence. They then come up with
Yeah.
a conclusion which is summarized in a snappy statement or a couple of lines, and then that finds its way onto the social media like Twitter or whatever, and people grab
Yeah.
onto that headline phrase or sentence, and that's what helps to form the way that, well, actually in many cases forms the way people think. Do you think? Tell me this, Pat. Do you think? I'll tell you what I think in a minute. But do you think people actually just swallow this sort of stuff whole? That Rupert Murdoch produces some image of, say, Keir Starmer or of Rishi Sunak, and that people swallow it whole, that they don't look at it and think about it and then decide whether they agree or not. Do you think they just swallowed hook, line, and sinker?
You see, and this is going to sound unbelievably uh, arrogant, but there's a certain people, like 4 million people used to buy the Sun. These are people going to work in the morning. They didn't think a lot of about what they were busy. They were families. They were working people, and they don't sit like me and you. They're not political nerds, and a lot of them got their views from the Sun. You know that. Remember the famous one with Neil Kinnock with the last part. You know, they started referring to anybody that didn't agree with the right wing. It was the loony lefties. And I'm digressing again. I was up in the Highlands of Scotland. I met this guy as an electrician from somewhere in England, the Midlands, and he hated the Labour Party. He used to buy the Sun. He says, if you're black and had one leg, the Labour Party would look after you. But if you're white and working class, they have no time for you. And he really believed that crap and so on. And do you remember the one about Kinnock, to go back to that, with the last person leaving Britain, please turn out the lights? You know, they had everybody believing if you were left wing. Now, it was again, and this was a party aimed at working class people. These working class people had a billionaire telling them how they should vote. And Jude, they did vote for it. Like, Thatcher was no friend of the working class. Neither was the Tory party. They were voting against their own class interests. She was anti-trade union. She was anti-workers' rights. They weren't allowed to strike. Working people.
But don't forget that, Pat,
you sort of go,
don't forget that's quite a while ago. So the question is really, does that obtain
human nature hasn't changed, Jude?
I'm not quite so sure that it's the same sort of undiluted impact that it had back in those days. And of course, you remember that the Sun had the famous headline. Was it after Tony Blair's victory, where they said it was the Sun what won it, or was that John Major? I can't remember.
Hold on, let me reverse it on you then. If you explain to me how the world has become more right wing, if what you're saying, how come Donald Trump can get elected, Boris Johnson can get elected? Come that the Express and the Mail, have non-stop campaigns against asylum seekers and all the rest of it. Surely that, who's setting? It's not BBC setting that agenda. Where's that agenda coming from?
I think television is very important. I think we underestimate the way that television works on people. If they keep presenting a certain light. When's the last time you heard the BBC speaking favorably or warmly about a left-wing politician? Your question time. Question time appears to be fairly balanced, and Fiona Bruce always says, "Oh, this is representative of all the people, all the different opinions."
Yeah, absolutely.
But there are confines within which they speak, and beyond that, nobody will be allowed to speak. So I do
remember Noam Chomsky's famous one that it's an illusion of democracy, that the terms of the debate are prescribed, and you can argue as much within that. But you rarely see George Galloway or people like that on Question Time when it comes to Gaza, because the BBC are too nervous about letting them on.
It's the same thing I actually think applies locally. I think that newspapers in Ireland are also, whatever about the owner, they do seem to, their views seem to filter down, despite the fact that people aren't buying nearly as many copies of the Irish Times or the Independent or anything else like that. Somehow or another, those views find their way into the common...
Remember, let's take it to, two things. Do you seriously think when Tony O'Reilly, the former rugby playing, Brit-loving, whatever, that when he owned the Independent, that he didn't have dinners with his editors, who copped on? Can you imagine for a second one of his editors going and supporting Sinn Féin? I don't think he would have lasted too long. You don't have to put it. Remember, someone claimed there was no interference from Tony O'Reilly. I would say bollocks.
Well, of course, you're absolutely right, Pat. There is, I remember my own time in the BBC, there was no formal censorship, but there certainly was an informal censorship. That is to say,
absolutely,
you were taught, without being taught directly, you very soon learned what topics, what people you should speak to, what topics, what people you should stay away from. That's a fact. That's a fact. Over years of experience in the BBC, that's the way the BBC operates. Now, you might say, yeah, well, that's the way the world goes, or fair enough, that's the decision the BBC can make. But the fact is, everybody presumably pays their TV license, and yet everybody has not been represented fairly on the BBC. I'm caught in a bind with regard to the BBC. I think they're a very, very professional organization in the sense that the product they produce is very glittery, very streamlined, very professional. On the other hand, I worry seriously that we forget it is the British Broadcasting Corporation, and it's going to adhere to the sort of norms of the establishment in Britain. Okay, let's move sideways a wee bit from bloody well Rupert Murdoch. The very thought of him makes me ill. You remember what Ian Paisley Jr. said about homosexuals? How he said that the very thought of what they did turned his stomach. I simply say that Rupert Murdoch has been married to several women much younger than himself. Leave it at that. Okay, so let's move to another thing that's quite closely linked to that. What was it now?
It was Tucker Carlson, Jude.
Oh yes, Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson. Know something? I wouldn't have known that man from a hole in the ground, but that name was in my head for the last I don't know how long. This is about, you're interested in talking about his meeting with Putin, and he got a big long interview.
Several people. I was in the gym and sports complex there last week, and the guy says to me, "Hey, did you watch the interview?" And I says, "What interview?" He says, "The interview Tucker Carlson did with Putin." She just didn't even know it was on. So anyway, we had a conversation, and I said, "What was it like?" He says, he just went on for over 2 hours." But anyway, here's the thing. He says, Tucker Carlson asked him something at the start, and he says, "Will you give me 30 seconds?" Putin says, "Will you give me 30 seconds to answer that?" And he says, 30 minutes later, Putin was still talking, and Carlson hadn't interrupted him. The interview went on for 2 hours, 7 minutes. And the thing that caught me, I was yesterday I was looking up, and this guy called Chris Wallace, who's a former Fox News guy as well, and he had an unbelievable go at Carlson. By the way, Jude, apparently it got the interview got 6 million views with something like the first couple of hours. But by the way, a view is considered anybody watching it more than 20 seconds. So how many people actually stayed to watch
that's
it?
Right. I think that's very true. Very true. I think they made it as long as they did. But here's a theory I have. I think they made that interview as long as they did because that would deter people from watching the whole thing.
Well, whatever. Well, I don't think anybody's going to watch the whole. But I mean, Chris Wallace said he referred to Carlson as a useful idiot, but he says that's unfair to useful idiots. He said basically he didn't. He says Putin. He says it wasn't so much. He says of what Carlson asked him. That was the issue. What he didn't ask him. He said he didn't ask him about the invasion of Russia. He didn't ask him how many of his opponents had disappeared. He didn't ask him what was his plans for the future or anything like that. He says it was basically a propaganda exercise for Russia to justify what Putin has done. And and as well as he says, Carlson is a big supporter of Donald Trump. And he says that here is another one of Putin, Carlson. He seems to love he says orange tinged dictators that he likes. He went to Trump and he allows these people to spew their whatever.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that's true. And if Tucker Carlson comes out of the Fox News stable, then he probably is an absolute jerk. But I would be interested. I have to confess, I haven't seen it. I've just seen wee clips, the tiniest clips of it.
Yeah.
But
well,
I think we should be getting, I think it's a good idea to ask questions of and get answers from every side. During the Troubles here, there was only one side of the story was given, and that wasn't a good thing to do. Likewise, no. I think with Putin, if Putin is going to invade, if the Russian army is going to invade Ukraine, And I think it's interesting to see what is your thinking, Putin? What's your justification for this? How can is it some talk about Nazis in there, or how many Nazis he talk? In other words, somebody who would ask him questions. I think your complaint, maybe, Pat, and many people's complaint would be that Tucker Carlson give a certain soft passage to the man.
Absolutely.
Wasn't a good enough interview.
You see, years ago, remember David Frost and people like that. Jude, I think there was actually more openness. The whole thing has been sort of narrowed in recent years. There was more openness 20, 30 years ago. The thing about it, Donald Trump, he refused the point blank to do interviews. He never did meet the press in America the whole time he's campaigning. All he ever did was go on Fox News and Twitter. And I think there should be some sort of golden rule that anybody standing for a senior office like Prime Minister or President should come on and meet the press and be asked by guys who know what they're talking about, not propagandists, not sort of PR people, but real journalists who are asking questions like Walter Cronkite, all those guys years ago, even Chris Wallace and so on, who ask straight questions, and I think, like, basically, Donald Trump got himself elected by never answering questions from the other side. He just played to one gallery. And when he became president, he was a disaster. He totally alienated the country. And one thing that Biden has said, that the reason he's standing, and I take it what he was saying, if Trump wasn't the main candidate, he would retire. He says he fears for American democracy if Trump gets elected. Well, and so would you, so would I.
Yeah, and so would I, but I think you've touched on something there, Pat. I would agree with you completely that candidates, say, running for office, should be forced to meet with the press, answer questions from the press, and no slick, quick answers. They should be pressed to give a full, logical answer to whatever questions are asked. Not only that, Pat, but I think when somebody assumes office, certainly a prime minister or a president, there should be, it could decide. It could be once a month, or it could be once every 2 months, or once every fortnight. They should be subjected to not just the State of the Union message, where they say stuff and nobody's asking any questions. That's what the media is for. The media is there to hold to account power. And it really doesn't get a chance to do that. These guys say, no, I'll not bother doing it. Or if you come, you'll have to give me a really easy ride. I'm rewatching, Pat, the Borgen, the series Borgen. Did you watch that?
Very, very good. Yeah,
God, good. It really impresses on you, and that's quite old stuff now. It's 15 years old at least, and you see it from the phones that they're using it. But you could see how the way that politicians were presented in the press, but most particularly on television, that was crucial as to how they succeeded or how they failed. So I think TV is a huge weapon. It could be made far more interesting than it is in terms of politics, and politicians could be held to account far more sharply than they are. The final point to make is this. I think many TV stations and companies underestimate the public appetite for serious stuff. They turn out this crap of whatever the latest soap opera is, and people lap it up. And if you look at the ratings, those are the things that lead the ratings. But there's no reason why. I see it when we have local events here in Belfast, like West Belfast Talks Back and so on. Certainly if there are issues, the halls are crammed with people, and they're full of really important questions, and they don't hesitate to ask them. So that's what I'd ideally like to see the newspapers and the television particularly doing, is having these sessions with politicians where they could be asked the kind of questions that would be on the mind of the average person.
Jude, you triggered something there. Why do you think politicians surround themselves with professional PR companies, by media handlers and all the rest? And look, hey, if you want a prime example, watch what's going on. And we're not getting into a discussion on Gaza, but Israel has, if you go onto social media and go onto broadcast media, Mark Regev is on everywhere. And Jude, I give you a simple example how propaganda works. Very simple. The Israelis had stripped a whole group of Arab men, Palestinians, and held them on a football field. Mergev was asked to explain it. He says, and this is what he came up with. He says, it's very warm in the Middle East, and that's why they're asked to take off their shirt. Now, Jude, Jesus, and you sort of go, but he's on all the time, and he's the evidence clearly points to the Israelis bombing a hospital. Didn't happen. I don't know anything about that. He goes to a refugee center being bombed. I don't know anything about that. But he comes on and says factually that UNRWA is totally a terrorist organization. He can state that with 100% justification, and you see it right, left, and center. Basically, it's just propaganda from start to finish, and he gets away with it.
Yeah, I know. I think it's shameful. I really think it's shameful. And well, you see, the thing, once again, TV in a way takes its cue from politicians as much as politicians take their cue from TV. I mean, what politician have you seen interviewed on television who came out and said that what Israel is doing is mass murder and genocide? What politician have you seen saying that on the BBC or ITV or RT or anybody else?
None. By the way, Claire Daly and Mick Wallace are saying it, and they're being tolerated. There's a guy on, I can't remember who it was, saying these people are representing us on the European stage. They are a disgrace.
Yeah. Of course, that's the idea. If somebody's saying something uncomfortable, project them as a loony of some kind. The loony left is the most obvious example. Okay, Pat, let's move on to a third item, which I didn't headline. And that is the fact that Sinn Féin's, we've talked a little bit about this, but the fact is that Sinn Féin's, well, not a slump, but it certainly has gone down in the ratings. They claim now that, I don't know, I haven't looked at it, but I gather that the last 3 opinion polls show them going further down. So they're down at least 5 points or something. Now, there's an article by Una Mullally in the Irish Times, and she says she gives 5 reasons for the slump in Sinn Féin's fortunes. So I'll read out a few of these, and then you can tell me what you think. She says that, one, she says Gaza has replaced housing in the headlines, and therefore housing is Sinn Féin's baby, and therefore that's been displaced, and as a result they go down a wee bit. She says, secondly, there's a need for clarity about its own policy by Sinn Féin about, for example, rental housing. What exactly needs to be done? That there is a lack of clarity in what they're saying. Third thing is Dublin, which is a stronghold at the moment for Sinn Féin. And it says Dublin centre is sort of characterised by drugs, by empty offices, by run-down sort of feel to it. And again, Sinn Féin are the TDs there. A fourth thing she mentions is rural, right? Well, she doesn't say right-wing farmers, but that's essentially what she's saying, where they're very opposed to the idea of their rural lives, their small town life being interrupted by refugees coming in. And finally, Mullally says, Mary Lou McDonald isn't as popular as she was. And she says that Mary Lou and the Shinners, generally the leaders, are slow to bring in experts from outside who could enhance their work rather than do any damage to it. Now, that's a lot to take in, but are there any of those things that grab your attention, Pat, that might be true? Or a damn lie?
There are quite a few of them, actually. Remember on Friday, we did discuss that thing about Mary Lou's, she wasn't sure-footed at all, Jude,
you said
the aftermath of the Dublin riots. I remember at the time, even Jude, that very night, I thought, no, Mary Lou,
so you spotted that, Pat? You spotted that? I didn't see that. I mean, I saw her talking, but I didn't see the implications. But you're smart man. Yes, go ahead.
Thanks very much for education. But there was that. Then, Jude, there is the whole thing. See this refugee asylum thing? That is crosses the board. There's right wing and left wing on that, and I'm not sure which side either's on. Like in small towns like Buncrana, which is only down the road, and Moville, like there were attempts to burn down places. And Sinn Féin seem to be trying to ride 2 horses. They're on the side of the local community and they are on the side of the asylum seeker. and you know, there is a sort of lack of clarity. You know, and you see, this is the thing when you become nearly a party of government, you have to take a sort of side. And I think Sinn Féin are going to have to say, look, we're see asylum seekers. If they're legitimate asylum seekers, they are more than welcome. It's up to the government to provide accommodation. We should have had about 10, 12 centres, government built centres for these people. We're dependent on the private sector and they are ripping the arse out of it. There's an accountant I know, mentioned this before, said there are people in Donegal making 100,000 a week, you know, people who own buildings from asylum seekers. So there's a whole sort of thing that, right, moving on to Dublin. Dublin, there's transport, the cost of you can't get a car in Dublin now is nearly an impossibility. They rent a flat's almost an impossibility. As you said, they run down ghost buildings. The rents and the rates are for business. 2,000 building or businesses apparently are closing down. We small business because the costs are just so much. People can't afford to go there. If you're a kid going to UCD or Trinity, you know you better bring the bank manager with. Jude, those are all things, and they haven't been addressed. So, Sinn Féin are, as you said earlier on, they have the most representation in Dublin and they seem to lack clarity. And what are they going to do about all this? Now they were going to say, when we get into government, we can't, you know, you can't do much when you're the opposition. You need the levers of government to sort of say, right, we will provide funding for this, we will provide funding for that. Here's what the laws will introduce there, and so on. But anyway, the bottom line is Sinn Féin, Jude, I think have come on. They're sort of reaching that stage that they've grown so much, and there's so much change that I don't think they are sure. At one stage, they were a party of protest. Now they're going to facing the prospect of being a party of government, and they're going to have to take hard choices.
I'm amazed. Maybe they're holding their fire until nearer to election time and they bring it out. But I think Una Mullally has hit the nail on the head with that particular thing, the question of clarity. Yeah. I think the other things can be questioned, you know, whether or not they'll bring in outside experts or whether there's a rural right-wing farmer lobby or whatever. It's a lack of clarity, as you say, for example, on refugees. What is the situation? See, Sinn Féin should be commissioning people to go and get some facts and figures. How many people are coming in? How many people is that in proportion to the population? How does that compare to other countries? You see, I think most Irish people are very open if they can be faced with a logical argument, a decent argument about refugees or immigration. In fact, I'm almost certain of that. But if you don't give it to them, then some son of a bitch is going to feed them propaganda, right-wing propaganda, and justify unspoken justification of burning down.
There's arson out there. There's unaddressed racism. And there's right-wing agitation, as you say. Sinn Féin hasn't nailed themselves down on what they are going to do about all this, or as you say, they haven't come across as clear what they're actually thinking about all this.
Yeah. I that saddens me because I think they've got a lot of talent among their ranks, and certainly they couldn't make a worse mess of things, at least socially, as has.
The other thing, here's a question for you. If you're from a farming background, do you seriously think Sinn Féin sort of left-wing policies would go down well in rural Ireland?
Well, depending on how they were presented and depending on what kind of farmer you were addressing, because there's farmers and farmers in it, as they say. In the north here, there's the Ulster Farmers Union. Now, the Ulster Farmers Union is a pretty powerful organisation, but it's also very largely a unionist organisation. So you have, when you're talking about farmers, you're talking about hill farmers with small holdings, and you're talking about guys who are people like the late leader of the Fine Gael party, John Britton, who owned swathes of land. And I think that's a different animal altogether. I think most people, if Sinn Féin present their policy correctly, most people who are not doing that well will respond to it, because Sinn Féin argue for things like fairness and no privilege and no waste and no backhanders for people and so on. And I think a farmer or a city dweller or anybody else would accept that. But the clarity, as you say, is what's needed. And it's not sure.
We left out. Sinn Féin rode the horse of change. And that was what everybody wanted. There was two Irelands. there was Ireland who were at the upper end who were doing very well, and Sinn Féin spoke for those at the bottom and who said we need change. And they were very clear at one stage. And then along came the refugee crisis, then came the housing crisis, and Sinn Féin clarity and change. And if they can get clear policies and people understand them, and if they can say we stand for change, the status quo is not working for a vast majority of people at the bottom. Jude, if they can get those two things right, they'll be back on the horse again.
That's right. The money is there. The money is there. The South is in an affluent state. It is billions more than it expected to take in taxes one way or another. So those could be directed to adjusting the balance in society in the South. But Sinn Féin don't seem to have produced programs.
Quick question for you. Kwasi Kwarteng wants to bring back Boris Johnson. You have a minute to answer that.
Well, there's a certain logic to it. I wish it wasn't Kwasi Kwarteng who had suggested it. Well, wasn't he the guy that, wasn't he Liz Truss's mate?
Crashed the economy in 6 weeks.
Well, I don't know if he's the best person to be like asking a Nazi what he thought of Hitler. No, I think Boris Johnson certainly traditionally has been a very, very powerful vote getter. And we saw that in the 2019 election. Now, the question is, have the British people got short memories?
Surely the fact that the Conservatives or the Tories are where they are now, they should. That's also down to Boris because he lied that much.
But on the other hand, I might say anything we can try is worth trying because otherwise we're down the tubes.
But 80 Tory MPs are not standing for re-election. What does that tell you?
Yeah. That's a sinking ship.